And we're live, yay! All right. Thank you all for joining us and welcome to this event with Casey Gueren and Dr. Shieva Ghofrany for It's Probably Nothing. I'm Carter, I use they, them pronouns, and I am the event coordinator here at Astoria Bookshop, the bookshop hosting this event. If you don't know who we are because you found us through the magic of the internet or social media, we are a bookshop in Astoria, Queens. Before we get started, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping things. You will have the opportunity to ask questions during about the last 10 minutes of this. There's also an interactive portion to this event. So during the interactive portion, our wonderful guests here will be going through and seeing everything you guys chat in the chat box over on the side. So don't be afraid, be sure to interact. It's gonna be so much fun. But if you do have questions throughout, you can put them in the ask a question function. And this just helps us organize between the interaction with the workshop and the questions that you might have. And speaking of being able to chat with everyone over there, we will kick you out if you participate in any trolling, any racial, ethnic, or homophobic slurs. Basically, we ask you all to be respectful towards one another. Finally, there is a button right there down at the bottom that offers the option to buy It's Probably Nothing. If you are watching us over on YouTube, I will go and just put a link over there in a couple minutes and you can click it. And it's a really, really, really great book. So you should buy it immediately. In fact, if you want to take a couple seconds while I read these author bios, you can go and buy it. So let's get started and I'll introduce these two. Okay, so Casey Gueren, who uses she, her pronouns, is the former executive editor and health director at Self, an award-winning journalist and fierce advocate of accessible health information. She was also an editor and writer at BuzzFeed, Women's Health, and Cosmopolitan. She graduated from Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, with a dual degree in journalism and psychology. She lives in New York City. Dr. Shieva Ghofrany, who uses she, her pronouns, is a board-certified OBGYN and has been providing the community of Stamford, Connecticut with women's health care for over 14 years. Shieva has increased her online presence by openly discussing pregnancy, gynecology, and mindset issues on Instagram and Facebook at Big Love Fierce Juju, and has started a community for women to learn and engage about these subjects. So welcome both of you, and you two can take over and start talking about the book.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Miss Casey.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you? I'm so excited. I know.
I'm so excited too. Yeah, it's been a week.
I'm sure, because you've been doing your launch. I can't even imagine what that's like.
Very fun, very exciting.
So I am most excited. So for anyone out there watching us, anyone who knows me in my practice, and I've actually been in practice 18 years, not 14. I've been a doctor for 22 years. But every day I use this term. When someone has a complaint, I say, it's likely nothing, but let's check it out. So when you had reached out to me to interview me, I think for a vaginitis discussion, it was like yeast, right?
Yeah.
And of all the writers who I've ever been interviewed for any online magazine, yours came out the most accurate. I mean, your questions were astute and I was amazed, remember? And I said, and you told me about the book. And I was like, your book is called It's Probably Nothing. I say it's probably nothing all the time, but I always say, but let's check it out so that we can make sure, so that we can decrease anxiety while still addressing the concerns and so that we can find things early to fix them in case, God forbid, there's something. So I love that you did that. So with that, you have to tell us, like, what was the impetus? And were you, as you self-proclaimed in the book, were you truly that anxious about health?
Yes. Yeah, I have been dealing with that kind of health anxiety for like my whole life, to different extents. And I mean, I'm that person that thought all of her headaches were brain tumors and would be anxiously Googling any symptom that I had, or any even just like feeling of off in my body, thinking that was weird and different. And even in college, that led to a lot of panic attacks because I'm really just too tuned into my body, I think.
Mhm.
And then I became a health editor, which I wouldn't necessarily suggest for someone who thinks that they, or has a tendency to think that they have everything that they read about. But it
Because every
definitely,
time you learned about something new, you
oh
thought you
yeah, I wouldn't say not every time, but a lot of times, like an amount of times that was disruptive, I would say. um, and it definitely gave me a lot of empathy for the reader, of knowing that if other people also freak out a bit by their symptoms, or just like what they maybe don't know or understand about their body, that when they are Googling this stuff and landing on these articles, they don't have time for a lot of nonsense. Like, they need something that is accurate and inclusive and compassionate and gets to the point. So as a health editor, I realized that a lot of the things that I was doing every day, like digging through this really jargony medical research, and as you know, can be a little dense.
Mhm.
And also, just discerning between what's bullshit and what's real, and knowing where to find sourcing, all of that stuff just felt like such useful things that the average person could really use to help navigate all of those health and wellness messages that we're getting all the time.
Right.
So that was kind of the impetus for this. And that was
Well,
before COVID.
I know. I mean, so what's amazing is that you decided to go into health journalism despite, I mean, because the truth is, when we were medical students, every single one of us, like the first couple of weeks of any rotation, we were like, I must have hypothyroidism, I must have lupus, I must have, so I think that's natural in general, but it's funny that you chose that despite, I mean, I would have thought that it was very purposeful, because the benefit of being in the field,
Right.
on one hand, you can become very paranoid because you see a lot. On the other hand, you can also realize that of the myriad complaints people have, the majority of the time, it's actually nothing. Not even, it's like usually nothing. But as you know, there are a lot of somethings. And I think that's why, what I always say to patients is, if you Google something, like let's say I Google, I have a headache, the interwebs will say, could be a brain tumor, could be an aneurysm, could be dehydration or lack of caffeine. Everything is weighted equally. So there's no moderation or modulation of the, how likely something is. Whereas when you're speaking to someone, what I try to remind patients is, we as doctors are going through this differential diagnosis every time you tell us something. Like if you say you have a headache to me, I'm actually going through that. And in my mind, low on my list of differential is Casey has a brain tumor. But it's there, but I've already ruled it out because I'm looking at you, I'm thinking that like there's different reasons. But on Google, it just freaks you out. So this is where like there is a real challenge. And even as a physician, when I ever make the mistake of Googling something that is not in my field, of course I get worried. So I am so excited because I do think you are better at it than doctors are even. So I do feel like it's really important for you to tell us like what is the best way to Google and what do you think people should do? Or should they not Google? Because I say Google only for shopping and not for medical issues.
That's a good rule
to collaborate with. So how should they Google?
That is a good rule. I mean, I would be fine with that rule, except that I do still create health content for the internet. So, if you
Google Casey Gueren only for health content.
Yeah, right. No, I think it's about like narrowing down the places that you trust, narrowing down, the sites that you're going to go to for that kind of information. And actually, I have a chart in the book that's like my go-to source for different like body parts and different kind of medical complaints. And I think just having that, I mean, again, as a health editor, I would always have that list handy. And if I knew that I was writing about, like you said, we talked about like yeast infections for an article, I knew, okay, I'm going to go to a gynecologist, but I'm also going to look at the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and see what their recommendation is. If we're talking about a medication, I'm going to go to the FDA, I'm going to go to the CDC and find out more about rates and prevalence for this condition. So these are things that as health journalists, you're right, we're trained to do that. As an average person, I was not. And so I definitely think that my health anxiety did tend to dissipate a bit with that experience, because I knew a bit more about like how that kind of machine was made. And I didn't look at those articles of like 11 things your cough might be as equal weight anymore, because I kind of understood a little bit more. So yeah, a few tips for Googling. I mean, the first one that I heard about when I was reporting for this book, and I talked to a bunch of psychologists about, well, should people that know that they are anxious about their symptoms just stay off Google completely? We just stop. And, they said, monitor yourself, like know your limits. But no, you don't have to stay away from Google, but know when you're doing it just for like reassurance seeking. And I thought that was so interesting because I know that I do that. I know that sometimes you just want to get a little bit more certainty. When
right, but then that's the problem, right? Because you want more certainty that your headache is just because you forgot to drink your cup of coffee, but now you're like, tumor, aneurysm.
Right.
I feel like that's actually, to me, that's the hard part. Like, do you actually get reassurance? Which was your intention, but you don't get it. I feel like it inflames the situation.
Exactly. And that's why they were saying, if you know that like you're seeking reassurance in this way, that's when you shouldn't Google.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Yeah,
okay.
That's the time when you're never going to get that reassurance. You're never going to have more certainty in that instance. And, I was talking with a friend and colleague recently for her podcast where she mentioned that if, sometimes that reassurance isn't even like a positive thing. It can sometimes be like reassure or confirmation that the thing that you thought it was, it probably is.
Right.
And it's like, if you just keep Googling, you'll find whatever it is that you're searching for out there. So if that's kind of your intention, maybe don't Google, maybe give it 24 hours.
Right.
And, if you are going to Google, if maybe you're sitting there thinking, I just want more information about this thing that my doctor said that maybe it is, and I'm definitely guilty of that too, of like, well, they mentioned this word, I want to Google that and understand that better. That's when I would say always look at those primary sources, in that case being like major medical organizations, because you can go down that rabbit hole of reading a ton of different articles that you don't necessarily know their reporting and fact checking standards, and it can just be a bit of a mess. So there's a lot
of chat rooms, like a lot of the patient rooms where people are talking about things in a very inflammatory way. Yeah.
And I bet that you see that a lot for like pregnancy stuff, because I feel like that's one where there's a lot of message boards and like sharing of information that's maybe not coming from a major medical organization or a medical source.
Or like, for example, the Tylenol came out this week, right, in the news. And I said to a few people today, if you haven't heard of it, don't look it up, but you'll hear it. And the headline will be Tylenol causes all these issues. When in reality, when you read the meat and bones of it, you'd have to take a lot of Tylenol for a long period of time in your pregnancy for it to cause any issue. But many people don't read the whole study or the whole article even. And so, as an editor, you guys have to create, taglines and titles that are catchy.
Yeah. But I think that's another great tip, is like to make sure that you are reading if you are going to be Googling it and you're going to read that thing, read more than just the headline.
Right.
And I would say be very wary if, as you're reading, you are not seeing where they're sourcing from, whether it's showing, gynecologists and OBs like you, and you can, actually click on their site and see who they are and their credentials, or see the actual study that Tylenol article was referencing and how many people it was looking at, when they were looking at it, what those numbers actually were. If you're not, or if the article is not like showing their work, that's a brand that I wouldn't necessarily take their word for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think the hard part, right, for the public is that medicine is, as a system, and I say this as a doctor, medicine is a challenging, broken system in America. As good as it is, we're lucky to be here compared to other countries. But so I think many doctors don't have the time to talk as much to the patient and explain things. So because of that, your only recourse as a human is to go seek where you can, which is the internet. And so unfortunately, it's this vicious cycle. We don't really want you Googling, but you have to Google because we don't have the time to describe everything to you. And no one's learned anything in health class, as you pointed out in your book.
Right.
And
I think, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so I think that's the problem. So if we have more information that is valid, it's so much healthier.
Yeah. I think that's where so many of these like wellness trends and fads and like predatory wellness brands kind of do find their footing, is those cracks in the system where people are not having a ton of great options, or they are not finding accessible, affordable, non-discriminatory healthcare. And so they go looking for alternatives, and they find something where, these people are listening to them because they have more time, because they're not doctors with, what did you say, like 40 patients back to back today? Like Yeah, like it makes so much sense of why people end up running to Google, because it's the easiest thing. And it is that vicious cycle, because then you're going to pay, you're going to see more of these messages that like there's something wrong with your body. You should be optimizing your health in XYZ way. Why aren't you?
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I do think, and I actually am very public about the fact that I really enjoy a lot of integrative modalities and alternative modalities, and I did a bit of a master's in it. That said, it is frustrating, though I understand why. Like you said, we've opened up the world because doctors don't have as much time, which is not what we choose. We would choose to see 10 patients a day, but no one reimburses us enough to like turn on the lights with that. And so because of that, you either have to talk a lot like I do, which most people don't, or you have to accept that then people are going elsewhere, paying naturopaths or integrative physicians, again, many of whom I trust and I refer to. But there are a lot of others who then spend an hour with you and sell you a lot of things. So that's another thing. If they're selling you a lot of stuff, a lot of products, you have to be wary, right?
Especially if like they're the only one you can get it from. Like if someone is suggesting something and they're like, you can go get it at Dwayne Reed, like that's different than someone who is saying like, I have this proprietary blend that doctors don't want you to know about. Like anything that's dinging that like persecution complex of like, they're lying to you and I have the secret. Like, I think that's the big red flag that I always want to wave as a health editor of like, doctors do want you to know about things that work. They want to help you.
And especially stuff that usually the doctors aren't profiting from, ironically. But and I think you and I know the bigger underlying problem of all of this is that right now there's such a rift in our world. And a lot of this does have some political underpinnings, meaning that lack of trust between the citizens and the CDC, the FDA, all that part of it. And so it's really conflated the situation and made it so much more onerous for us to be able to help people, in ways. So I am perennially sad about what's going on.
And that's been like the hardest question to answer that I've gotten recently in promoting the book is like, well, then, who's always a trustworthy source? And it's like, there's no perfect answer for that. But I think having your, radar up a little bit, just being more mindful and looking for conflicts of interest, like you said, or looking for like who's profiting off of this. Looking at, is this a brand that has, a track record of reporting on health responsibly? They have trained health reporters. They are transparent about their fact checking and research. It's okay, to be getting your health information from that kind of a brand if that's what you're more used to and comfortable with versus always only going to the CDC. Like, I get it. We want to engage with other brands and companies that feel more conversational, and we totally should. But, hold them up to those same high standards.
Right. Well, and I think right now there's a lot of mistrust, unfortunately, or fortunately, like it's good for us to think about CDC in particular. I know. So when you were researching the book, what did you find that was so surprising? Like, what was something shocking to you about either things you could find or why people are finding it differently? Yeah.
Well, one was that we don't have universal health education curriculum in the US.
We don't have universal anything education.
True. I mean, yes, to be fair, but but we all learn algebra, like
useless as it is. Who needs algebra? We need to know when we ovulate and why women should have orgasms and that it's not. Yeah. I mean, all that stuff.
I know. And so that was so frustrating and surprising to me that like, we, all learn algebra and I never used that, but I really could have used any kind of health literacy education or something that would have made me feel more confident and informed asking these questions so that I didn't get all of my health education and sexual health education from Cosmo. And hey, that made me then want to work there and talk to experts like you every day. But it really was frustrating that I wasn't getting that anywhere else. So that was really surprising. And just digging through some of like the health education standards and guidelines that are out there that they ask schools to live up to and report on every year. And the very small percentages of schools that are actually doing that and meeting those standards is just, it's shocking, that it doesn't, or it totally makes sense why then people go to Google, to ask these questions because they don't have that information.
Right. Well, and that's where I am perennially sad again as the doctor who feels like many of us would like to spend more time talking to the patients, but then there's no time because increasingly every year there's these requirements on us to like make sure you ask them about this. And And so I think that's the frustration, right? That many parts of our time are broken. And that's where the internet can be a great place for you to learn about. I mean, right now, I do think social media has helped bust open a lot of myths. I mean, even just, this is such a little one, but did you learn that the clitoris is not what we were always taught?
Outside, yes, but not until I became a health editor.
Yes.
So, yes.
It's not even taught anatomically in medical schools often anymore at all. I mean, I shouldn't say anymore.
Oh,
Like, what we're now learning is newer than when I was started 22 years ago. We didn't know that on the labia and on the mons, there's more nerve endings. So this is where people can go to Google and actually learn more about it, because on the internet, people have been talking about it more, and even just on social media. So I don't want to malign it. I use the internet a lot, so I do think it's good. What happened? What changed things? Like, you started writing this before the pandemic.
Yes. Yeah. So I started writing this in October 2019, and then it was due October 2020. So I was a little ways in. I mean, I'd already have, my outline. I'd done a ton of interviews already. I'd done a ton of research, and I'm really sitting down to write in earnest. And it's like March in New York, and things are getting real. And, the first few months of it, I was like, oh, I don't know how much to put in here about it, because, as content creators, we always want to be wary of, like, are we tying something to something that then it's not going to be really evergreen, and then it's going to be like a book about COVID. And so I, of course, first was like, oh, wishful thinking, like, this will be a blip, like, this will be nothing. And then like summer rolled around, and I'm still stuck in my tiny apartment, and was like, this has to make it in. So yes, you will see in the book that COVID is obviously mentioned. It's not a book about, like, dealing with COVID anxiety, but it, became this shining example of why we do need health literacy, and why we do need media literacy, because the stakes were just so much higher than when I set out to write this, and debunking things like celery juice, and, giving people more context for, like, the birth control and blood clots situation. And, those were the things that I was planning on really tackling. And then this happened. So changed things just a bit.
Yeah. I mean, every time we talk about this, it always strikes me that I think so much of this has to do with just the general, like, psyche and mindset of the nation, our politics, our sexuality, and each human. Because there's, on one hand, just the average person who has some health anxieties because they think every time they have anything, it must be cancer, and cancer must equal death, versus the whole separate onerous part where our world is fractured because of the politics of what's happened during COVID. And now it's made people distrust, traditional medicine in so many ways. So that part is sad, because how are we going to fix it? So
I just saw, Allie's comment here, that it's also hard when doctors don't believe us or won't listen to us because we are fat or Black or a woman. That's exactly, what you're talking about, is like, if someone is feeling dismissed or discriminated against at their traditional mainstream Western medical doctor, it's just not surprising that you're looking for alternatives elsewhere. And I do think it's just wise to, be on guard that these companies know that too. Like these wellness brands that are selling you random fad products and supplements.
They're capitalizing on,
Yeah.
But so, Allie, to address that, I actually had just posted a couple weeks ago about when, would I rather patients come in to empower themselves or to collaborate with me? And I always say, I don't want people to feel that they have to empower themselves against me or against the medical community, because that implies that we're trying to keep people down. And I know there's a lot of bad doctors, just like there's a lot of bad people in the world. There's a lot of good doctors who care, who are unfortunately sometimes constrained by the system. So my advice would be, find a doctor that you really care about, that you can collaborate with, so that you don't feel that you have to, like, arm yourself against them. But don't, to Casey's point, just necessarily turn your back towards some good traditional medical doctors in an effort to say, okay, but I'll go pay this person, out of pocket. Let's face it, that there are so many biases in medicine and in, things that we find on Google even. And so I think that that's a whole extra layer to it that makes it really challenging. I think when we talk just about anxieties that are a little bit more, like, not simplistic, but more straightforward, outside of the constraints of, like, socioeconomics and our race relations and our damaged sexuality in America, I always try to remind people, when it's just, again, to me, the more simplistic, like, you had an abnormal mammogram and now you think you have cancer and that you're going to die.
Right.
That is something where, like, from a mindset perspective, I think we can do better in really trying to teach people that You might have an abnormal mammogram, but the likelihood of abnormal mammograms being anything irregular in the end are not very high. So I think that's where I hope the internet can help women the most. Like if you have an abnormal pap smear, please don't assume that you're going to have cervical cancer because you likely won't.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, when we go online with that question though, like that's an example in my book, Googling abnormal pap smear, and you're going to go down that rabbit hole of like, especially if you're someone who is a little bit more anxious, especially anxious about your body and your health, you're going to think, well, I am probably that one in however many that had this result and got this prognosis. And so, it can just be really hard. And know that you are not alone if you go down those rabbit holes.
Yeah. Well, and I know we wanted to do does Carter want to open it up and ask anyone if they have something that they want to bring up for you to show them how to?
Yeah. So we thought it could be fun. And I got this idea because at BuzzFeed, one of my favorite brainstorms that we used to do for content was, what is the last weird health or body thing that you Googled or wanted to Google? Mm-hmm. And it, we had an anonymous form, but it looks like we can't really be anonymous here. But if you want to tell us any weird health question that you've Googled recently, and we can kind of Google here in real time and give you some feedback about both what a health editor sees as the first page of search results and what a physician does.
And nothing is TMI. I can say that for sure. And Casey, you know that. And in fact, the more interesting, the better. We are happy to hear some strange things.
Definitely. Yeah. I don't want to see one about like, do I have COVID? Oh, here. Okay. This is a very good one.
Good. Oh, that's a good one.
That's a really specific one. Okay. Lexapro and restless leg syndrome. That's a great one. Okay.
So while Casey's going to pull up the screen share, I will say this, that I find so fascinating with my patients and just even my friends and everyone. They will Google things all the time. And yet when it's like, I called you with an abnormal pap smear, you're freaking out, but didn't Google tell you that 90% of us carry HPV? So why are you not being comforted by Google when you're coming to me and telling me like, but Google said I should take this supplement? I'm like, well, then why didn't Google comfort you that everyone's got HPV? So I do think it's funny what people are.
Google, get it together.
Yeah. Google.
You guys can just see everything. I think, oh no, what happened? I lost it. Okay. We're going to try this again.
Yeah.
This is my first Crowdcast. Oh, here we go.
And while you're pulling that up, I'll tell everyone I Googled like one of my ribs is sticking out more than the other one. And it's my left side. And I knew it was pretty normal. But since I'm not a musculoskeletal physician, I was like, I'm going to Google it, but I'm going to be cautious when it tells me that I have like, a pancreatic tumor.
Oh, okay.
Did you find it?
Yes.
And it told me what I thought, which is the left side of the rib cage pops out. Okay. Good.
All right. So Kate, you're not alone. 62,900 results on this. So a lot of people, there's a lot on restless leg syndrome and Lexapro, but luckily the first thing that comes up is our actual studies. So that's
surprising. Casey, can I interrupt one sec? Because I don't know if everyone else is wondering about this. Is that because you tend to go to like the first one that showed up? Show us that first one again.
It's a Pubmed article.
Right. So if anyone on here doesn't know, Pubmed and NCBI is what the doctors use to look up all of our articles. So it's actually a great website, I think, even if you're not used to reading medical articles, you still will see better ones. I suspect, Casey, that's because your Google will be different than my Google, right?
It might. I mean, we can definitely try, but I think it might be.
I'm going to look at it while you go through stuff. I'm going to Google it too.
Yeah, because we even tried opening an incognito window to see if that would like not use my like cookies to.
What was your Google search?
Like all Self magazine articles and stuff. But yeah, I think that.
What did you put in? Just does SSRI? What did you put in? Lexapro and restless
leg syndrome.
Okay, I'm going to put that.
Or actually, you know what? Let's go with this one. Which antidepressants cause restless?
Kate did say that she also got the same results. So
there you go.
Well, Kate might be Googling some smart stuff too. Let's see what the dumb doctor who doesn't, Lexapro and restless legs.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that it's so specific.
Look at mine is that T and F online,
which is another journal.
What is that one? I've never heard of that one. Okay, and then the NCBI is the second one. So
right.
Good. All right. Well, tell us. Debunk it.
Yeah. I mean, I realized if I click on it, you guys can't see. Can you see this? Oh, you can. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So there is a case report, but and a review. So when you see, one thing to keep in mind is that, and actually it's really funny that this is about not really funny, but okay, restless leg syndrome came up also for me today because a friend sent me a link to a Gawker article about, there's a ton of articles on restless anus syndrome because of one case report of a man, an elderly man who had COVID, recovered from COVID, and then had what physicians are describing as restless anus syndrome. That was probably as uncomfortable as it sounds.
Like it was contracting completely.
Yes, and like painful, and like going to the bathroom wasn't helping. And anyway, a lot of the headlines were like, restless anus syndrome is the next COVID symptom, to know about, or COVID complication. And it was based on a case report. So if you ever see case report, know that that is usually one person. And it's kind of like a phenomenon that they're documenting it because it's so rare. And so often if you see these headlines, and there's usually like, 10 of them in a day that you'll see for the same case report, it can make it seem a lot more common than it actually is. So this might be that, but it also says that they're reviewing the literature. So there may be more things.
And it's also from 2008.
True.
Yeah.
I wonder if so yes, another tip though, for anyone who has an interest in diving into medical research, when you have a question, Pubmed, like Shieva said, is an amazing resource for looking up what research exists on a given topic. So if you are interested in like antidepressants and sex drive, antidepressants and birth control, and things like that, and you want to just see like what is the body of research on something, PubMed is great for that.
Mm-hmm.
We have Google.
And someone else just wrote, did you see this one, Casey?
Yeah, and I go bald because I have COVID. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that I definitely seen some headlines on that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try that one. Am I going to?
So, and
like hair loss.
Yeah, Allie, I mean, we always say that anything that causes extreme stress can obviously cause hair loss. So even if we didn't have data, if someone asked me, I would say, I think it makes sense that you might have short-term hair loss, ideally not long-term, just from the stress itself.
So this is interesting too, that something to keep in mind right now is like anything with COVID, Google is doing this, like, I think it's called a knowledge panel, where they are making sure that the first thing is the CDC. And so that will happen sometimes with even, different organizations have their own, like I know that if you Google a different birth control method, it'll come up with bedsider.org and their knowledge panel on it. So that can be helpful. It's not always, but if you see something that's like highlighted like this on Google at the top, it's either sponsored or it's a knowledge panel and you can trust it. But yes, so first thing, this is interesting because the first thing is a major medical organization, which is great. And then the second one is a consumer focused brand. Mm-hmm. But yes, any, American Academy of blank is always a good thing to see in your search results. Mm-hmm. So that I would say is definitely a good source. Healthline tends to always be at the top of search results for a lot of health questions because they are super comprehensive. Like they check off all the boxes that Google wants you to check off in order for them to deem you kind of like worthy and really relevant and giving exactly what somebody wants to find. So I'm not surprised to see them up there. They're always killing it with that. And then lots of videos.
Yeah. But it seems like, Allie, by the way, from what I just saw really quickly, it seems like most of it is, they think because of just the stress.
I believe that's, we can go to American Academy of Dermatology.
Mm-hmm.
Because isn't that the telogen effluvium, which is a very fun word, isn't that something that can also happen after like very bad illness, any kind of bad illness?
Sometimes anesthesia, bad illness, stress. It happens actually almost always after pregnancy because your hair arrests. I mean, for different reasons, that's more hormonal. But your hair kind of arrests in one phase and then it all sheds out.
Yeah.
Casey, and I would love if anyone else has more questions, please put them here. This is a good one. Hold on. I like that one, Becca. But let me ask you, Casey, I would like for you to touch upon two things. One is just, what do you think as the health writer about the controversy with Facebook, and Facebook just really causing a ruckus in our lives because people use that as an engine. And then the other one, gosh, I can't remember. So go ahead and let's talk about lactating without being pregnant.
Yes.
Yes.
Wait, yes, let's Google.
And by the way, while she's looking it up, Becca, the answer is yes. And if you are lactating without being pregnant, you absolutely should see your doctor, not because it's anything dangerous. The likelihood is it's not, but you can have higher prolactin levels from an area in your brain. So it's really good to get it checked out, and they can rule everything out. Yeah.
So again, Healthline at the top. They are consistently at the top, which again, like they do a good job of also, you can see here, showing their work. And that example that I was giving before of like, you want to see the sourcing. It's like, I mean, you're seeing the sources immediately, but they also tend to have sources all the way at the bottom telling you. I think they don't in this one, but
good. Becca, I'm glad you're addressing it with your doctors. You're going to be fine, but it's good to address it. Yeah. Okay. Casey, I thought of my question for you. So there is one entry on the interwebs about hiccups in pregnancy that all of us as doctors do not know where it came from. It doesn't seem to be true. No high-risk doctor worries about it. But when babies have hiccups in the uterus, we are actually largely comforted by it because it implies an intact nervous system. There is one entry that, and this leads to my second question, there's one entry that says hiccups after 34 weeks may be a sign of distress, talk to your doctor. And I'll never forget the day, like 2 or 3 years ago, a patient said to me, I just Googled it. And I was like, honey, I don't believe it. Please call him. Like, send me that number. I think that you misread it. And she sent me the link.
Oh, wow.
And so this leads to my second question, which is, once something is out on the internet, even once, like I know I have been quoted in things like, let's say it was for you at Cosmo, and then that same quote shows up in random places in other articles that no one ever asked me about.
Yeah.
So how, I mean, I don't even know if there's an answer to this, but what can we do about that as Googlers when we don't know if it's taken out of context?
It's a great question. And it's something that I've noticed too, as you know, a lot of times I'll be just kind of starting my search for an article and I want to see like what is written on this topic already. What are some holes that I can fill in? And yeah, I'll find all this reporting and I'll be like, well, that doesn't seem right. Or it does. And like, that's really interesting. And I want to go check it out. And when you try to find the original source for that, it can be like playing a game of telephone and you just keep going back and back. And I will never forget I can't remember the article that I was working on at BuzzFeed, but I remember contacting this expert. Her research was quoted in all of these different articles. And I'm like, I just want to know, like, when did you say this and to who? Because I'd like to include it in my article. I want to make sure I'm including the original source. And she's like, I have no idea where that came from. Mm-hmm. I never said that. Yeah. And that was shocking me. And I know that it doesn't, that's not, I mean, hopefully it's rare, but that it does happen. And so like, it's not rare.
I don't think it is. I mean, I really don't think it's that rare. I think that there have been times where I've been not misquoted exactly, but things have been taken just ever so slightly out of context where the implication is different than my intention.
Right.
Yeah. And that can be very challenging for all of us going onto the internet to Google, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. It's so frustrating because you don't want people to not trust, you know, the media professionals that are bringing you this information, especially when, you know, if someone's like, well, I don't just trust the CDC or the FDA, then it's kind of like, well, then who do you turn to? But yes, this does unfortunately happen. And it's also why I would say to, you know, look at these articles through that lens of like, where are they getting this information? Are they showing the sourcing? And is there, you know, often at some of these websites, you can find their like standards and editorial practices, and that you'll find, you know, their fact checking and research processes, and just a brand that is going to put that out there and be transparent about it is typically one that is going to be a little bit better at, you know, collaborating with sources like you to make sure that everything is legit before it goes up versus one that's just going to get it up very quickly and you don't necessarily know if that was taken out of context. But also a writer should, if I've ever been emailed by someone of like, oh, can you change, you know, this is actually my practice now or something. It's like, yeah, that's because the internet, you can change it.
Right.
It's not like
but I think once it's out there, like if you write an article and then people keep quoting it, it only gets change in your original source. It doesn't then trickle through. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
It was so interesting. I have an amazing patient I love who's 37, and she had her first baby, an unplanned but very wanted pregnancy when she was 17 years old. And she said it was just her mom at home. She had the baby. She had no one to rely on other than her mother, her pediatrician, and like nothing else. And she was a great mother. Like I delivered that baby, and that girl is phenomenal, right? Awesome. Fast forward, she gets her education. She finds someone she cares about. They purposely have a baby. She's now like 36, 37. And she has this child, and her daughter is now like wonderful and so supportive. And the mom comes in and was so anxious with this new baby. And I was like, what's going on, love? You are so good. Like you were such a good mother. You look at what you produced and everything. And she said exactly what makes sense to me. When she was young and she had nothing else to rely on but her intuition and her mother and like one book, she did what she felt was the right thing. Now with all the information on the internet, she's filled with self-doubt. And I think that's another problem, that as humans with ovaries, especially, we are not encouraged to trust our intuition. Mm-hmm. And we often supplant what we think is our intuition and kind of allow the external, like what everyone else thinks, to make us, get out there. And so I think that's a really hard thing. There's too much information and it can make us feel less than.
Yeah, there really is. And that's what's been so hard. As a journalist, you always are like, well, why are we going to be covering this? What are we going to be adding to this conversation? And I think it's something that's like any responsible journalist should be asking, because you don't want to just throw more stuff into the void. And I do think that all of those wellness messages around like, you are doing this wrong, or you should be optimizing your body or your health in this way, and you're not, or, the parenting mistake that everyone's making, or, whatever, all of the recalls, like I know my sister is going a little crazy with all of the recalls around baby products, and it just can make you be on high alert with all of that. And something that I heard from the psychologist I spoke to for my book was that one kind of risk factor for health anxiety is paying so close attention to your health and your body. And I think that we are kind of reinforced right now with all of this information out there. That can be hard.
I think there's another Google question.
I'm not seeing it. Where's the other?
Carter, we don't see you said there was another Google question.
Yeah. Here, I'll just read it to you. What do heavy periods, even with hormone IUD, mean about my fertility?
Ooh.
And this one's from Layla.
So heavy period fertility?
Yeah. Heavy period with IUD.
Oh, with IUD.
Mm-hmm.
I'll copy and paste it into the chat.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not showing up. And by the way, while Casey's doing that and screen sharing, another thing I was going to say to everyone out there, one thing I say to my patients often is, if you like either Google or ask 10 different professionals and you get 10 different answers to the same question, ideally that should not be a sign to be really confused, like, oh my God, I have to pick the right answer. That should be a sign that there is no one right answer. And then you should really revert back to your intuition, which again, we are never encouraged to really engage with, which makes me sad.
Okay. Okay, we have another, so a health brand, like a consumer focused brand up top, Mirena ID for treatment of heavy periods though, and that's not really what we're asking.
That's actually that question that whoever's asking, I don't know if you want to ask us more public questions, that's actually a very specific question that I have a feeling is not going to show up.
Maybe if I just do though, like heavy periods with IUD, though I know that's like a common side effect of the copper IUD, right?
It is, yeah. But and then you're going to see either that the copper IUD will cause a heavy period, or you'll see that the hormone IUD, which has progesterone hormone, is the antidote and way to treat heavy periods. Right. But I have a feeling, Casey, what if you put in what she asked? I think she said, what does it mean for my fertility?
Yeah, I think I have heavy periods.
Yeah, what do heavy periods, even with hormone IUD, mean about my fertility? By the way, while Carter's looking it up, it doesn't necessarily mean anything terrible. I mean, the likelihood is that you just have heavy periods that don't have a specific hormonal or anatomic reason, but you should call your doctor. You should get an ultrasound done to look for things like fibroids, which are common, polyps, which are common, But yeah, so so that it doesn't really say anything. That's
right.
the other
It's but that's interesting. I mean, if if the question is about being on, like, if your period was heavy and then you went on, let's say, a hormonal one like Mirena, to thinking that that would like not make it as heavy, and then it's still heavy, I guess then the question could be around, like, is a really heavy period a sign of anything for your fertility?
Right. And so the good news is if you have a really heavy period, despite Mirena or Liletta or Skyla, the hormone ones, your fertility is still most likely fine, meaning you're probably ovulating still, but you should talk to the doctor because there are some hormone tests they can look at because that can sometimes cause heavy bleeding. There's an ultrasound, like I said, they can do to look at your uterus and your lining of the uterus. And sometimes you actually just have other unrelated to female hormones, you have unrelated issues that can cause heavy bleeding. Like some people have von Willebrand's factor deficiency, which is an incredibly common, nerve-wracking sounding thing, but it's actually really common. And patients have heavy periods with it regardless. So yes, Layla, make an appointment with your trusted collaborative gynecologist. Yeah.
But it is interesting that when I Googled that, I was also one of the second or third, always, no matter how I phrased the question, had Mirena. One of the brands of hormonal IUDs was coming up, and their webpage is on there. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is like, you're not just going to see the major medical organizations and the consumer facing brands. You are also going to see pharmaceutical brands and their branded content, which can be, great and reported content, and usually is created in collaboration with the physicians that consult for them. So it's not just like, our medication is the only thing that can help you. Right. But just know that, like, sometimes that stuff is branded by a pharmaceutical company. And I have seen some that are websites that a pharmaceutical company will create before their drug has come out, and they want to give more information about, let's say, heavy periods. Mm-hmm. And so they are making sure that they are creating content about heavy periods, and that then they will eventually add in their drug when that becomes available and approved. And I have seen that. So just, always.
So does that mean in the Google, like in the algorithm, they got bumped up because people kept looking at their information before and then they turned that into?
Yeah. So I don't know actually if maybe it retains the Google ranking. It might retain the Google ranking if it's the same URL. I think, like, if they don't change the URL, which sometimes companies will continue to have, like a more like consumer facing website, even when they do launch their drug. But a good rule of thumb there is to scroll to the bottom of the page always when you're getting information from something. You can see, who created this, who is like the actual person or company or corporation behind this. And if you see like Pfizer or something at the end, you just know that, like, that's not Condé Nast, it's not Hearst, it's not Rodale, like, it is a pharmaceutical company. And they are, again, not to say that the content's wrong, it's just be aware of where it's coming from.
That's their lens. I mean, I guess, does anyone else have any questions, by the way? Because Casey and I could talk forever, but we really do want to answer your questions. Nothing is TMI. Please, please, please.
Yes.
I guess, like, my perennial question is, do we think that the internet has improved these things? I mean, clearly it's improved so much in the world. We're able to do this right now. I mean, I use social media obviously a lot for my own, just, to educate. But ultimately, I think, gosh, there is just so much more information. I was just thinking today, like, in college, how did my friends and I know where to meet? Because we didn't have phones, right? And now with everything such easy access, and I worry about the effect, because it's wonderful in so many ways and really challenging in other ways.
Right. You had asked about Facebook before, and like that, I think it's a necessary part of being a health journalist, is knowing how to get your content to go on Facebook. And so just, again, know as the consumer that, and as the reader, why something is put there and why something is framed sometimes the way that it is, to be really relatable and shareable. But yeah, I do think that it does, having access to all of that information, and like just so quickly, it does. I write in my book that it's kind of like gambling, like, you just know, like, it's right there, like a slot machine. Like, you just, sometimes it's been really helpful, and so you're going to go back to it, even though there were other times where it was like super not helpful. And it can be really hard to not. I mean, I say sometimes like, turn your Wi-Fi off. Like I have definitely done that to myself when I have said, I'm going to stop worrying about this bump that I, have, and I want to Google it, but I'm not going to. Sometimes I do have to take my phone away.
Well, and that's why I say all the time, I really think, like, this is why I love that your title is It's Probably Nothing, because I really do think the framework of saying whatever ailment you might have, anyone who's watching us, let's say you have an ailment, you have a feeling, you have a symptom that bothers you. First, think it's likely nothing. And then second, think, but I'm going to check it out. Because then if it is nothing, you're going to check it out and confirm that it's nothing. And if it is something instead of nothing, you're checking it out and you're likely going to find that something early, and then you'll be okay. And that paradigm is often correct. Most times when people don't end up okay, it's often because they have either delayed coming forward or they haven't advocated for themselves, unfortunately, which you have to do in the medical community. Now, that's not always true. There are things that come out of nowhere. But again, it's really valuable to just think that way so that you don't avoid.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just popping in because we have a couple of questions in the Q&A section. This one's from someone also named Casey, which I think is fun. How did you decide that you needed to write this book?
Oh, hi, Casey. I think it was, knowing that I could see how both the wellness industry and the digital media landscape, as Shieva was talking about, like this limitless information, was definitely stressing me out more than it was making me feel like more well. And it definitely was giving me more things to stress about. Like there's a chapter in my book about those like wellness fads and wellness products that you see all over Instagram. And so many times I would see them and be like, do I need that? Like I didn't even stress about that before. I didn't even know that was a problem you could have. And now I think I have it. And so I realized, though, that I had access to all these amazing experts and tools and resources as a health editor that really helped me kind of calm myself down and talk myself out of these things. And I realized that that's the kind of information and tools that would benefit everyone from having, because I'd have these conversations with friends and family outside of the media industry. And I'd feel like I was being, super boring, saying the same stuff that my friends and I in the media industry talk about all the time. And they're like, oh, I never thought about that. Like, oh, okay, well, maybe this might be news to people who don't work in news. And so that's why I wanted to put this out there. And then when COVID happened, it was like, oh, no, this is a good time. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad you did it.
Thank you.
Me too. This book is, I think, super important. And a reminder that you can buy it down in that green button down at the bottom.
Thank you.
It's also, by the way, very visually appealing.
Ooh.
Like, meaning the colors and just the tactile, the pages. I know that sounds
she's delightfully hefty. Yeah. Like
yeah,
she's
really
heavier than I thought she was going to be. There's some weight there. And yeah, I love what they did with the design. I thought that was awesome. Yeah, it was so cool. But so Shieva, I have a question for you. Are there things that you find your patients asking like all the time? Like the things that you are constantly having to either talk people off a ledge on, or that you're like, man, why don't people know about this? Because that's always something I find interesting when I'm interviewing experts, is like, what's the thing that they get asked all the time?
Honey, there's a list. I got a list. I mean, I say all the time, I want to constantly debunk lack of knowledge about HPV and herpes. There's so much anxiety, and Lord, it is a dime a dozen. I mean, I say all the time, we all have herpes, we all have HPV. Please don't be worried if you have it. I really want to purposely destigmatize it all the time. For all the Google in the world, I don't know why people don't read and then see. 90% of us carry HPV, 50% of us carry herpes, regardless of our sexuality, regardless of if we use condoms or not. It's common. They don't know a lot. I mean, it's not anyone's fault, but most humans with ovaries don't learn about perimenopause. And I use the word perimenopause and they're like, oh, I'm old. Most people with vaginas do not learn about the lack of elasticity that happens around menopause. And then they're bereft because when they have sex, it hurts. And they don't know that they can use vaginal estrogen and it's safe. And I mean, there's a laundry list. And then in pregnancy, my God, it's like, we laugh that people will come in and be like, well, I read on, Facebook that it's not safe to do blah, blah, blah. And so they listen to Facebook over us. And me in the morning, they'll call us for like the Tylenol dose. And I'm like, well, why did you Google the Tylenol dose? Don't Google like a big thing. Like, should I, try a vaginal delivery after a C-section? But like Google the Tylenol dose because that's an immutable fact. But yeah, I really actually think the most basic like human health things about people with ovaries and vaginas does not get taught in health class, like we said.
Right.
Most of the people that I see in my practice don't know when they ovulate. I mean, these are the most educated women. They have children even. They don't know when they ovulate. Many, many, many people with vaginas and clitorises have no knowledge of orgasm and what it takes to have one. And they feel broken. And it's so deeply sad. And listen, I mean, a lot of that is, I say the patriarchy, but as I always say, the patriarchy has the matriarchy supporting them. Not blame anyone, but people who are supporting them. So yeah, I mean, you can tell I have opinions about this.
No, that's exactly why I asked. Yeah, because I think that, I mean, again, for me, I felt like that was such a rich, rewarding part of my job always has been being able to talk to people like you and know that I'm not alone in the questions that I have and the concerns that I have. And like, it's not weird to think this, and this. And I do find that, my most, educated and informed and even progressive friends will have, a little bit of hesitation around asking certain questions or wanting to bring something up, with your friend, let alone a doctor. And I know that being in that position in a doctor's office and you're like wearing a paper towel and the doctor has 5 minutes to see you and like, you are like, oh, I'm just not going to ask it because I haven't worked up the nerve. It's just always been so awesome to hear these physicians say like, oh, no, you're not the only one who thinks that or worries about that.
Well, I always joke, like, you want to be common when it comes to your medical. You don't just be like, I've never heard of that. But listen, I will say this to the public. I think that as humans, we can do a better job in the public of being more open about our shit. Like the more, and this is a more uniquely, I will say, again, female thing. I think that people tend to want to put on a good face and put those posts like life is good. And I think it's terrible. Like we should be open. We should tell everyone without acting like my life is so bad because, oh my God, I had this, but also like be open about your stuff. And maybe open is only to your little inner circle. But I think there's a lot of showboating. And I think that that's terrible for all of us. And I think that as a group of people who could support each other and make each other feel better, there's just a lot of the things that people post that make everyone else think that they're alone. I mean, I say all the time, I have groups of patients who all see me who are all good friends, and they'll come in, friend after friend and complain about something. And in my mind, I'm like, all your friends have the same complaints, but you guys don't talk about it despite being out and drinking your wine. So I implore these, everyone, humans, just be open and talk. It's amazing what you'll find when you're open about these things, that people will be happy. They'll bond,
not everyone has to write a book about your anxiety and all of the weird health questions that you've had. But talk to your friends about it.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
Casey, we have 2 more questions for you. We can power through them. Was it difficult to go from journalist writing to this longer form writing in this book?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I approached it at first of like, okay, if it's this many words, if it needs to be around 50,000 words, like that's this many articles, and the chapters could be like each like 3 articles. Like I was thinking of it in my head, like articles. And I very quickly realized that it's not how you write a book, and that I was completely out of my depth, and that I really needed to think of it in a totally different way. And so it was really helpful having the proposal already done. I think for nonfiction books, that's pretty standard, having a proposal done ahead of time that you pitch out to publishers. So I kept using that as kind of like an outline. But yeah, it was completely different from writing articles, because I'm sure as anyone who is on here in media knows, like you're writing an article and you just kind of keep going back to, you read the same sentence, 20 times. I read my book probably like 50 times while writing it, because you have to like remember your place kind of. So it was very hard.
Can I ask really quick before, Carter? So are you going to write more books?
My friend was just saying that, is that like when you like haven't even had your first baby yet and people are like, so when's the second baby? Like, is that
like,
kind of,
yeah.
I would love to. I think like this was so personal and like so on brand for me that I think, and it was still very hard to do, that I think I would need to find like whatever that next one is. I don't have it already tucked away.
Got it. Okay. Good.
We would love another book.
I'd love to write one, but
Yes.
I think I need a rest.
Yeah, take a break. Self-care. Ed asked, hi, does big pharma commercials drive anxiety and patients into the physician's office asking for prescriptions that is advertised? Same with articles in magazines. So I guess I would say this is a question for a little more for you, but.
Well, I would love to hear Shiva's answer to that.
I'm sorry. So ask me again, because I feel
Yeah. So do commercials for like big pharma drive anxiety in patients? Have you seen that? And drive people to come into the office asking for prescriptions?
Interesting.
Yeah, people like see an ad for a drug and say like, I want that one, or like, should I be on that? Do I have that?
Well, I'll answer the second part first. I get anxiety. I don't even watch that much TV, and I see anxiety because that last part where they're like, and it may cause blah, 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 blah. Like, and I will say, as a physician in general, I can't stand direct-to-consumer marketing for medications. Though I understand it, we live in this world of commerce, and there is some power in direct-to-consumer issues that, like, even in some of the consulting work I do, I feel like there is power in it, and so we have to use it. But yeah, I do think, of course, it adds to anxiety. I think there's a lot of, thank God for big pharma in so many ways, because we need Western drugs. I always say I had chemotherapy and I was happy to have my toxic chemotherapy, but let's face it, it definitely infiltrates our world in ways that are not always healthy because there's money involved. I'm glad that I can say I really don't think any doctors are only using medications because like the reps bring us pens and pads of paper and all that stuff. But I think like we as physicians sometimes see the reps and then we learn about the medications from the reps. And that's a very biased source. Just like you said about their websites. I mean, they have to be biased. It's not their fault. Right. But it's very hard to sometimes tease apart. And then as a patient, you're also learning about it. And, you know, many of us have a tendency to want to take a pill to fix things because that would be so much nicer and easier than doing sometimes the work that we need to do. And yet I love medication as well because sometimes we need the medicine and not to think we can fix everything ourselves. So that's a convoluted answer, but yes, I think it adds to the anxiety. I mean, I think that all the media that we have built is double-edged sword, like anything else, wonderful and dreadful.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Miserable and magical.
Ending on a very positive note.
Yes. Thank you both so much. And thank you everyone who's watched. Do you two want to really fast tell people where they can like follow you on the internet or any upcoming projects you might have or any upcoming things going on with you?
Sure. Shieva, go ahead.
So I am on Tribe Called V, which is our Instagram site for anyone with a V. It's not women, it's anyone with a V. And as we say, anyone who actually cares about humans with a V. And the whole purpose is to increase your knowledge to decrease your anxiety. So that's why we like to export more information. So you can find me on Tribe Called V or on my own personal Instagram as Big Love Fierce Juju.
And you can find me at Casey Gueren. You can see how to spell my last name down there on both Instagram and Twitter. And right now I am freelancing for a few different brands. So I'm trying to keep my website, which is CaseyGueren.com, updated with all the places that I'm writing for right now, because that's very new to me, not being on staff somewhere. So I'm trying to keep up.
We like
it.
Yeah.
Yes. One more time, remember that green button right down there. You can click that right now. You don't need to listen to me tell you about all the events coming up, although I would appreciate it. The events that we have coming up in the shop in the next week are on Tuesday next week. We have an event for all the Queens houses, which is about architecture in Queens, which is very fun. It'll be really interesting. Goes into like the historical background too. It's going to be fun. And then on Thursday, we have a short fiction panel. So it's going to be short story authors discussing their works. It'll be fun.
Nice. Great. Everyone who is still in the New York area, go check out Astoria Bookshop.
Yay.
My favorite.
Support local and awesome.
10 years.
Yes. Thank you both so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for watching. All right. Have a great night.
Thanks, Casey, for writing it.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.